It started on a Monday morning that didn't feel like just another Monday. The terminal at Rosewood International Airport was its usual buzzing chaos, families herding children with stuffed backpacks, business travelers checking watches, coffee cups in every hand, and the metallic echo of rolling suitcases rattling across the tiled floor. But for Colonel Marcus Hale, this was no ordinary trip. His polished black shoes clicked with a measured rhythm, each step heavy with purpose. On his chest, rows of service ribbons gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a quiet testimony to decades of service. But the real weight he carried that day wasn't on his uniform, it was in his heart. Out on the tarmac, waiting under the morning haze, was a casket draped in the nation's flag. Inside lay Private First Class Evan Parker, just 22 years old. A son. A brother. A soldier who had not lived long enough to see the world he fought for. Marcus wasn't just traveling. He was escorting Parker home, fulfilling a promise etched into the very soul of the military: no one gets left behind. And yet, within the next few minutes, Marcus would face something he had never faced before, not on foreign soil, not in combat, but here, on American ground. Something that would shake the terminal, ignite social media, and put an entire airline under a storm it couldn't control. He approached the airline counter, papers in hand, military orders, identification, everything perfectly in order. The young woman behind the desk didn't look up at first. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with a bored rhythm until her brow creased. "Sir, could I see that again?" she asked, her voice suddenly tighter. Marcus handed the documents back without hesitation, studying her face. He noticed it immediately, the hesitation in her eyes, the quick sideways glance at a coworker, the stiffening of her posture like she had stepped into a situation she wasn't prepared for. She whispered something to another agent, and that agent's eyes flicked toward Marcus, unreadable, before they too bent down behind a monitor. The seconds stretched. Marcus had been in war zones where moments like this meant the difference between life and death. But this was different. Here, there was no gunfire, no threat to his safety, and yet the tension in the air told him that something was about to break. When the woman returned, her smile was mechanical, almost forced. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Marcus didn't blink. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he replied evenly, tapping the paperwork. "Everything is in order." "I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol in place. We can't override it." Security protocol. That was the word that began unraveling the morning. "Protocol," he repeated. "What protocol?" Behind him, the line was getting longer. People shifted, murmured. Some tried to look away, others watched openly. The atmosphere was shifting from impatience to curiosity. Marcus remained perfectly still. Years of discipline had taught him that silence could be more powerful than shouting. But the woman didn't offer more. She kept glancing toward the back, toward a group of airline employees huddled together, whispering like the answer to his question was something they didn't want the crowd to hear. And then, the supervisor came. The supervisor was a man in his late 50s, his hair thinning, his tie slightly loosened as if the day had already worn him down. He approached with a forced politeness, the kind reserved for situations that might explode if handled poorly. "Sir," he began, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but we have certain policies in place. Unfortunately, we can't override them at this time." There it was again, policies. A vague, catch-all word that explained nothing and excused everything. Marcus kept his tone even, his back straight. "I've escorted service members before. I know the procedures. And I know there's no policy that stops me from boarding this flight. So why am I really being denied?" The supervisor shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It's just an extra security measure. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." The words landed like a bad joke. A man in uniform, carrying out a solemn duty, was being told this was just routine. Marcus could feel the crowd's attention locking onto the exchange. People were leaning in now, pretending to check their phones while their eyes stayed fixed on the counter. Then, from a few spots back in line, a voice cut in. "Is there an issue with his military clearance?" Marcus turned slightly. The speaker was a man in his 60s with sun-creased skin and a navy cap bearing the golden emblem of the Marine Corps. A veteran. "No, sir," the supervisor replied, shifting uncomfortably. "This isn't about clearance. It's just standard protocol." The Marine's lips tightened into a thin line. "Yeah. I've been through security 1,000 times and I've never seen protocol keep a soldier from escorting one of our own home. So what's the real reason?" Murmurs rippled through the line. A young man in a hoodie pulled out his phone and began recording. A woman whispered to her husband. The air in the terminal seemed to grow heavier, like the oxygen itself was paying attention. The airline staff behind the counter exchanged uneasy glances. The young agent who had first spoken to Marcus looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Her fingers hovered uselessly over her keyboard. Then came another voice, soft, but deliberate. "Excuse me, sir, they're not letting you board." It came from a woman in her 20s, standing a few feet away, phone in hand. Her gaze was uncertain but determined. "That's correct," Marcus said. She blinked, as if she had expected him to say something different. Then, with a steadying breath, she held up her phone. "I'm live right now. People need to see this." And just like that, the dam broke. Another passenger raised his phone. "This is wrong," he said, shaking his head. "He's escorting a fallen soldier." From further back, someone called toward the counter, "Can you explain why you're stopping him?" The agents didn't answer. The tension had transformed into something far more dangerous for the airline: visibility. Phones were up everywhere now. The Marine folded his arms, his jaw tight. "This is a disgrace," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. The terminal went strangely quiet. The overhead announcements felt distant, like they were happening in another building. The only clear sound was the faint beeping of phone cameras starting and stopping their recordings. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket shook her head, muttering to her husband, "He's in uniform. This isn't right." Somewhere in the back of the line, a man's voice rose. "It's already trending." Marcus didn't move. He didn't need to. The storm was building on its own. The younger man in the hoodie glanced at his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He let out a low whistle. "This is everywhere now," he muttered, almost to himself. A woman near the windows gasped. "It's already on social media," she said, turning her screen for the crowd to see. Bold letters screamed across the top. "They just denied a U.S. Army colonel escorting a fallen soldier. This is how we treat our heroes. Hashtag let him fly." Underneath, the retweets were climbing by the second. The comments section was a blaze of outrage. The Marine grunted and pulled out his own phone. They don't know what kind of storm they just started. Up at the counter, the young agent looked frozen. Her eyes darted between Marcus and the glowing lenses pointed in her direction. Her hands trembled as she typed, but she wasn't making progress, just pretending to. Then the airport loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 482 to Denver will be delayed. We apologize for any inconvenience." A few groans drifted from the waiting area, but most people weren't even listening. All eyes were locked on the man in uniform standing at the counter and the employees who couldn't give him a straight answer. Somewhere near the security checkpoint, a young woman with braided hair raised her voice. "He's on Twitter now," she shouted. Within moments, passengers were leaning toward each other, screens glowing like signal fires. And then, another voice joined the mix, not from a passenger, but from a verified account. A veteran advocacy group posted. "We are aware of the disgraceful incident unfolding at Rosewood International Airport. Our soldiers deserve better. Action will be taken. The words spread like gasoline over open flames. The young agent suddenly stepped away from the counter without a word, disappearing through a frosted glass door at the back. She wasn't going for a boarding pass, she was going for damage control. Marcus adjusted his hat. He knew this moment. He'd seen it before, though never in a place like this. It was the moment when people in power realized they'd picked the wrong fight. But he wasn't smiling. This wasn't about winning, it was about Private First Class Evan Parker making it home with dignity. The crowd was no longer just watching, they were invested. Phones were recording. People were tweeting, streaming, typing. The hum of the terminal had turned into a low, steady rumble of disapproval. And then the supervisor returned. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a man in a crisp navy suit, an airline ID clipped neatly to his breast pocket. His stride was sharp and measured, the kind of walk reserved for people who are used to putting out corporate fires. He stopped short of the counter, eyes sweeping the scene, Marcus, the Marine, the rows of phones, the tense faces. "Colonel Hale," he said smoothly, "I apologize for the miscommunication. There was an error in our system. We're working to get you on your flight immediately." Marcus knew what miscommunication really meant. It meant, we got caught. Fix this before it costs us. He didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch. The man in the suit shifted under the weight of it. "An error," Marcus finally said. "Yes, sir. A regrettable mistake. It was not intentional. We'd like to personally escort you to the gate. First-class accommodations, of course." Marcus glanced past him to the counter where the agent who had denied him now stood with her gaze fixed on the floor. First class wasn't the point. "I appreciate the urgency," Marcus said, "but I have to ask, if no one had recorded this, if no one had spoken up, would I still be standing here?" The crowd murmured. The man in the suit's jaw tightened. He began to respond, but Marcus cut him off. "You don't need to answer. We both know." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman's voice rang out softly but clearly, "He's right." The man in the suit tried to regain his footing. "Sir, we sincerely apologize." "This isn't about an apology," Marcus said, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's about accountability." The words rippled through the crowd like a current. People weren't just angry anymore, they were leaning in, nodding, some even murmuring in agreement. The man in the suit could feel the ground shifting under him. "Colonel," he said, adopting a more authoritative stance, "let's get you on your flight now." But before Marcus could respond, another voice cut in, one that carried weight. "Sir." A young airport security officer stood at the counter, his expression tight, holding out a phone toward the airline representative. "I think you should see this." The company's stock began to dip. A trending hashtag calling for a boycott surged across platforms. Customers flooded social media with demands for answers. And then came the final blow. A coalition of military advocacy groups filed a formal complaint against the airline, citing discrimination and failure to honor service member protections. Cornered, the airline's CEO appeared on camera. He called it a regrettable misunderstanding and announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave. But the public wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Marcus completed his duty. He escorted Private Parker home, standing silently as the young man's family received him one final time. He didn't need headlines. He didn't need applause. He needed one thing, and it was the very thing he'd fought for from the first moment at that counter. Respect. And in the end, that's the lesson that lingered. Because respect shouldn't require a viral video. It shouldn't depend on public outrage. It should be the standard. And when people stand together, when they speak up, when they refuse to let injustice hide behind vague words like policy or protocol, they prove something vital. Silence is what allows these moments to happen again. But voices, united, can make sure they don't. The suit took the phone, scrolled, and his face drained of color. "What is it?" the Marine called from the crowd. The man didn't answer, but Marcus already knew, the fire had spread beyond the terminal. A major news outlet had picked up the story. The headline was blunt and unforgiving. Army colonel denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier, airline under fire. Beneath it was video from the terminal, passengers' shaky footage capturing every word, every pause, every refusal. The man in the suit handed the phone back, straightened his tie, and turned to Marcus. "We'd like to issue a public statement clarifying." "The public already knows the truth," Marcus interrupted. Silence. "I don't need first class," he continued. "I don't need special treatment. I need respect. And so does the soldier I'm escorting." The Marine let out a low grunt of approval. Others in the crowd nodded, some clapping softly. The man in the suit knew there was nothing left for him to win here. And then, like a scene from a different world, another figure entered the terminal. Tall. Measured stride. Authority in every movement. Not from the airline. Not from airport security. His badge caught the light, Department of the Army. He walked straight to Marcus and extended a firm hand. "Colonel Hale. I'm Major Ryan Calder. We've been informed of the situation." Marcus shook his hand without needing to ask how he got here so quickly. When the military moves for its own, it moves fast. Major Calder turned to the man in the suit. His voice was crisp, formal, and left no room for argument. "We're handling this now. Colonel Hale and the remains of Private Parker will not be flying commercial." The suit's mouth opened. "Sir, we were just about to." "You were just about to cover your tracks," Calder interrupted, polite but cutting. "The Pentagon has arranged a private military transport. It's waiting." A murmur swept the terminal. People looked at one another with widened eyes. This wasn't just a passenger dispute anymore, this was military business. Marcus exhaled, not in relief, but because the mission was finally back on track. He nodded once. "Understood, Major." Calder glanced at the airline rep one last time. "This will be addressed." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Marcus turned to the Marine who had stood up for him from the start. "Appreciate you, brother." The Marine tipped his head. "We look out for our own." Marcus glanced at the crowd, the people who had spoken, recorded, refused to stay silent. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his hat, and walked out. Not toward the gate, but toward the next step of the mission. But for the airline, this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the backlash roared. News networks replayed the footage on loop. Veteran organizations issued statements condemning the airline's actions. Politicians demanded accountability.